This is an introduction to the 1.0 tractor combine, which provides a low-cost solution to on-farm feed harvesting, diverse, direct market, and specialty grain or cover crop harvesting, or for use in research plots. It's designed for small farms, but it has many of the features of larger combines, such as an axial flow threshing system and a hydraulic header lift. The 1.0's 4-foot head is large enough to harvest several acres a day and handle diverse crops in difficult conditions. Because of the track design, it has low ground pressure and a tight turning radius, good for small fields, and the axial flow threshing system makes it suitable for sloped fields. In addition to low ground pressure, one of the key features of the 1.0's smaller footprint and weight is that it can easily be transported by a truck or trailer, especially if you're traveling more than 1.5 miles. Once it's on the trailer, it takes just a few minutes to lock the header up and to secure the combine to the truck or trailer bed. The 1.0 is small enough that it can be brought directly into the field for unloading. In general, the combine harvests counterclockwise from the outside in, so that the bagger is clear of the crop. Driving the combine is fairly easy with all the controls such as the thresher, steering levers, header height, and throttle within easy reach of the operator. The shifting levers, the high and low, and 3 gears are located to the right of the operator's seat, and the clutch is just like a manual clutch on an automobile. The front lever is high and low speed, low is away from the operator. The longer rear lever is for 3 speeds and reverse, which gives the operator 6 available forward speeds and 2 in reverse. Finding the gears initially can take a little practice, but it is not difficult. The clutch should be fully depressed with the machine stopped when selecting a new gear. Steering the 1.0 is like steering a tank. You pull the left lever to go left, you pull the right lever to go right, and leave both levers forward to go straight. Pull both levers back to provide parking brakes and use the lever on the dash to lock it in place for parking and transport. To start threshing and to engage the thresher, pull the leftmost lever backwards towards the operator. This will start the header, the feeder housing, and the thresher and the related cleaning components. Push the lever forward to disengage. The operating principle of the thresher clutch is very simple. The lever moves the idler pulley against the main drive belt, which tightens the idler against the belt to engage the thresher and the header, the feeder housing, and the remaining components necessary to start harvesting. The foot clutch is only used for the drive system and is completely isolated from the thresher clutch, which allows for independent travel and harvesting, and allows you to harvest in a stationary position as well. Pushing the clutch also stops the combine. The header hydraulic height control is a very simple motion. Pull back to raise the header and push down to lower the header. This can be done while you're driving to adjust for changes in crop height. The engine must be running in order for the hydraulics to operate to raise and lower the header. If you're doing maintenance on the header or on the undercarriage of the 1.0, remember to use the header lock so that the header does not fall unintentionally. The lock simply swings down in place and locks against the front drive axle. The 1.0 has a very tight turning radius, but big turns can also leave rough patches in the field. When harvesting, try making tight turns at the end of the row by keeping the throttle high and making the turns in multiple stages. For example, try doing several 30-degree turns back and forth to align with the next row. Most crops harvest well using maximum throttle, And when making turns, if possible, don't try to slow down too much. Keeping a good ground speed and threshing speed is helpful to avoid clogging and keeping an even flow of grain through the thresher. The header height should be adjusted to accommodate changes in crop and weed height to both capture the most amount of grain with the minimum amount of chaff and other material. The bagger can monitor the cleanliness and threshing quality and communicate with the combine operator if there are changes that should be made during harvest. Each crop is significantly different, and there are often differences within even a single field, so the operator should be ready to adjust to those different conditions. When first starting out, choose a good crop with minimal weeds and a solid stand for the first harvest rather than starting out with challenging conditions. 1.0 is designed for wheat and rice, but is successfully used for crops such as oats, sunflower, corn, and even dry beans and field peas. It's also important to monitor the feed auger and the feeder housing and the seed cleaning sieve and chafer for wraps and clogging, and make adjustments in the field as necessary. Proper function of the header reel, the feed auger, and the sickle bar should also be monitored. Having tools in the field is useful for making small adjustments. If the feeder housing gets clogged, it's fairly easy to remove the cover for inspection. All chains and belt tensions should be checked before a new harvest starts. When a 1.0 combine arrives from the factory, it usually does not have the header attached to facilitate ease of shipping. To attach, the drive coupling should be slid out of the way during assembly. Usually takes at least 2 people to align and bolt up using fresh lock nuts. These lock nuts should be tightened securely and replaced if the header is removed and replaced again. Make sure that all bolts are secured and torqued up tight before operating the combine after removing the header. And also make sure to slide back the drive coupling and replace the shear pin that holds the coupling to the drive shaft. Once the header is mounted, the aggressiveness of the feeder reels can also be adjusted based on crop conditions. Reel location can be moved forward and backward depending on the height and speed and location and how aggressively you'd like it. It's not hydraulically adjustable like the bigger 2.0 combine. The fingers should be adjusted so they don't hit the sickle bar or go too low or too close, but set so that they can pick downed or lodged crops. If the grain is standing, not lodged, the fingers should be upright, straight up and down. If you're trying to adjust for lodged conditions, then the fingers should be adjusted to rake back at about a 20-degree angle and should be very close to the sickle bar, but not touch. This can be adjusted using the side wheel adjustment, using bolts to advance or move back the reels and tines. Adjust feeder finger reels really close to the sickle bar. In some conditions, there should not be more than 1/5 of an inch clearance between the tooth and the guards. If additional adjustments are needed to the cutter bar itself, remove guards for access to the assembly to make sure that the teeth can move all the way through the guard. Full motion is needed to get a clean cutting action. More than 1/5 of an inch adjustment is needed to the sickle bar. Rotate the threads on the pitman arm that moves the sickle bar to increase or decrease the travel to the cutters. When properly adjusted, the action should be smooth and without interference. There should be about 1 millimeter clearance between the bottom guard and the teeth and about 0.5 millimeters to the top. Use a feeler gauge to get the clearance correct. If guards are out of alignment, use a wooden or rubber mallet to adjust and use washers and spacers or a long pipe on the guards to properly adjust. After it's adjusted, the action should be very smooth, again, without interference. And it should cut very smoothly. The clearance of the auger should be about 10 to 20 millimeters, and it can be adjusted using bolts at the end of the header. Use a pry bar to set the clearance and then re-tighten. The conveyor adjustment shouldn't be too tight. Leave it a little flexible, and you can test it by lifting it by hand. Remove the guards and adjust the bearings at the top of the housing if it needs to be tightened or loosened a little bit. After adjusting the tension at the top of the feeder housing, make sure there is no interference before tightening down the bearings and replacing the guards. The drive chains and belts on the left side of the combine are accessible by removing the guards with a few bolts. The action of the screen separator or sieve and chafer can be made more or less aggressive by adjusting the length of the control arm. More action will put more chaff in the bag, and less action will have cleaner seed but more yield back into the field. Adjust the arm longer to put more chaff in the bag and shorter to have cleaner seed. Fan and airflow can be adjusted for different crops, such as early wheat uses more fan and later drier crops use a minimum amount of fan. Move the metal flap by loosening the nuts and sliding the plate. The tracks should also be adjusted. There should be about an inch of wiggle room at the top of the tracks using two hands to wiggle it. Tension can be adjusted with a wrench at the back of the track. There's a lock nut that should be loosened first, and then turned to achieve the appropriate amount of wiggle room in the track. The clutch may periodically need to be adjusted. The bolts at the back of the clutch should have between 0.2 and 0.5 millimeters of clearance between the clutch arms and the back of the drive sheave. Adjust the clearance using the set screws to make sure that the arms have equal clearance, and then use a feeler gauge to verify. Then test to make sure that the clearance is also even when the pilot bearing moves the arms to disengage the clutch. After the clutch arms have been adjusted so that they contact the pilot bearing evenly, then go ahead and use the foot pedal to test to make sure that the full clutch linkage is operating and disengaging completely and stopping the combine when the clutch is depressed. It's also a good idea when you're working on the combine to double check any nuts and bolts that you see and clean out housings of any chaff before putting the combine away for the season. When you're done making adjustments, make sure that you test drive and test the operation of the combine before going back to harvest, and then replace all the appropriate guards. And of course, test it in a good clean crop to make sure that the combine is then functioning appropriately before putting it away for the season. For a new machine, it's a good idea to run them for 20 to 30 minutes to make sure that everything runs smoothly without issue. Check bolts to make sure they're still tight and there are no interferences. Maintenance times are covered in the manual, but in general, brush oil onto moving parts and use an oil can where necessary, and a grease gun for grease fittings and bearings, and use a brush to put oil on chains. After the final maintenance and final harvest, the combine is ready to be put away for the season. Lower the header onto wood to keep it out of the dirt, and jack the combine up and release the tension on the tracks for storage. And you'll be ready for the next season.